Welcome to Solutions Rising. I'm Rachel Branch. Joining me on this program as co-host is my friend, Pocky Whelan.
Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. And we've done so many shows, I don't even know now. Pocky continues to raise her voice for global peace, justice, and stopping the proliferation of nuclear weapons. And I am very, very honored on this program to welcome Dominican sister Carol Gilbert of the Order of Preachers. Sister Carol Gilbert has dedicated her life to raising her voice for justice, peace, and the most vulnerable. Her story is crucially important, particularly today. Welcome, Sister Carol Gilbert. Sister Carol, if I may. And we usually start out our program, with asking our guests to please tell whatever you would like to share about your background, about yourself.
All right. Thank you, both Rachel and Pocky, for having me here. I am a Grand Rapids, Michigan Dominican sister living in Washington, D.C. the past 5 years. And before that was a former junior high school teacher and then worked in an alternative education center for at-risk children. And for the last 42 years, I have been working for the abolition of nuclear weapons in war. And that has taken me to a lot of different places. Being a Dominican, our charism is veritas, which is truth. And Ardith and I always like to speak of it as speaking truth to power, from the Quakers, speaking truth to power.
Okay.
Good ecumenism.
Yes, yes.
Right. Well, what led you to start fighting against war and fighting all the proliferation of nuclear weapons?
Well, we were very multi-issue in Saginaw, Michigan, which is, I've lived in Michigan all my life till I moved to the East Coast. But in 1978, a group of us attended the first special session on disarmament at the United Nations. And it was the first time that the countries had come together to talk about peace since the 1930s. And it was my first time in New York City, first time being with a lot of people. And then in 1982, went back for the second special session, and that's when 1.5 million people came to New York City and heard Helen Caldicott. Dr. Helen Caldicott probably had a great influence on my life, because she said, if you have a SAC base in your community,
Strategic Air Command.
Strategic Air Command, shut it down. Well, Michigan had 2 of them. One in the Lower Peninsula, like Oscoda, about here. This is Detroit, and then the Upper Peninsula. And so we went back and we thought, we have got to start organizing to get rid of our Strategic Air Command bases. So this was the time nationally for the freeze movement. And so 1982, we're at the UN. We go back and we get a petition on the ballot, a legal ballot initiative proposal that the people of Michigan voted on in 1982, and over 56% of the people said, freeze nuclear weapons. Let's get rid of nuclear weapons, and it passed. So
I do want to just want to point that out, that this was 1982.
82.
And that was 56%
yes,
of the people of Michigan voted for the abolition of weapons, at least in Michigan. Was that
right?
it?
Yeah, to put a freeze on weapons and not allow them into the state. The problem was, in April of 1983, federal law supersedes state law, and so these cruise missiles, nuclear-tipped cruise missiles, were brought into our state. And so then we began what became a 12-year campaign in the Lower Peninsula to get rid of the weapons. Well, ended up with the base closure. They closed Fort Smith Air Force Base. The last 3 years, Ardith and I moved up there. Now, during those 12 years, we organized the state. We had hundreds of people that would come to vigils and demonstrations, and we were doing civil resistance, and we were going, to jail, probation, and then 10 days, and then 30 days, and then 6 months back in the 80s. And we had, the lawyers said to us, well, we can't really risk arrest or anything. So, you know, we've got this idea of what was called a Nuremberg campaign.
Whoa.
And what that was, and we had a newsletter that had all the information. It's going to be a year-long campaign. And because we had to be careful of frivolous lawsuits, we decided that we would go to the state capitol in Lansing. Well, first the lawyers took all kinds of affidavits from peacemakers, what we knew. And so they had all the legal process before them. We went to the Attorney General, who I don't remember, in the state of Michigan to ask him, they gave all the documentation, to ask him to go and arrest the people at Wurtsmith Air Force Base, the commander.
What base is that?
Wurtsmith Air Force Base
Wurtsmith?
in Oscoda, Michigan, to go there and arrest him. And then we went to Oakland County in the Detroit area because there is a manufacturer there. It was called Williams International. They made the engines for the cruise missiles. And so they were in violation of international law. And so we went there to ask their prosecutor. And then we went to Iosco County, which is where Oscoda was included, the base was included, to that prosecutor. So we had 3 press conferences in these 3 cities. It was just a way for a year long to educate people about the illegality and immorality of nuclear weapons, and it was able to involve lawyers in the process. Did any of these attorney general or prosecutors do anything? They didn't. But it was a legal document that was done. And then they ended up, of course, closing that base. And when Ardith and I moved up to that area.
May I break in
Yes.
just for a minute? Would you
Yes.
please talk about Sister Ardith Platt? Is
Yes,
that her last
Sister
name?
Ardith Platty.
Platty? Okay.
Yeah, Sister Ardith and I worked together these 40-some years. Sister Ardith was also a Grand Rapids Dominican sister, and she was principal of an inner-city school in Saginaw, and then started an alternative education center, ran and served on the Saginaw City Council for 12 years, was mayor pro tem.
Oh, my goodness.
Then decided to give the school over, leave that, and we began to work full-time on peace and justice issues. And she just died, I say with her boots on. She died, it'll be 2 years ago in October, very suddenly in her sleep. Listening that night to the debate between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton.
Oh, my goodness.
And so she went to bed listening to that and woke up wherever our spirits descend. And so, yeah, so Ardith and I considered those 5 years, because when Oscoda closed, so we worked with battered women. We learned a lot about that. We tried to get the military people, and they say, they always say, we take care of our own, to go up to Alpena, to the home up there. I mean, every story was so awful, and some involved Navy personnel, all kinds of personnel. So with that in mind, we also worked on the contamination issue. And the important thing there, when you say, is that Wurtsmith Air Force Base, they're in the news right now today. So all these years later, this is 1990 to 1993 that we lived there. And it is now in the news because some of the military who were stationed there have formed a group to deal with because they're sick from the PFSAs that were there. And the city of Oscoda has organized a group called NOW, and the state of Michigan is upset with the federal government because they're not cleaning up Lake Van Etten, and we know. So it's in the news now, all these years later, when we tried to warn them back then. But the base closes, and so, okay, where do we go now? We've got to go to the Upper Peninsula, a little town called Gwynn, that's K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base. And again, the 2 of us, and we would go to the base and pray once, twice a day, and mainly get into the town. And they're little tiny towns, and our friends were all non-commissioned officers. I learned the language of the military, and people say, oh, you hate the military. No, we love the military, and we're doing this. We wish you had another job, but we learned so much in those 5 years. But they closed that base, and so then we thought, where do we go now? And Ardith wanted to live in community, well, as did I, and there aren't a lot of communities, intentional communities, that work on these issues. But one was Jonah House in Baltimore, Maryland, where we went in 1995, and that is an intentional community, and it was started by Philip Berrigan, who
Oh,
some people might know. Dan Berrigan is his
Yes.
brother, and Elizabeth McAllister, his wife. And so Ardith and I moved into that community and became part of vigils and demonstrations at the Pentagon, at the White House. We're part of faith and resistance retreats, and our introduction into Plowshares Actions.
Oh, Plowshares is Martha.
Yes.
Martha, I just...
Martha
Hennessy.
Hennessy.
Martha Hennessy.
She was a guest on this program.
Wonderful. Well, Martha.
Yes,
So
that's how I heard about Plowshares.
Okay, well, we did 4 Plowshares Actions, and the last one in 2002 is when they decided to charge us with a felony. Up until then, we weren't charged with felonies, but the prosecutor said, I really want to teach you a lesson, and so he charged us. So there were 3 of us. Another one of the sisters in my community that acted. This was out in Colorado at the Minuteman missiles. So Jackie was sent to Victorville, California, Ardith to Danbury, and I to Alderson, West Virginia. And so we served our time and came back into the community. But I want to fast forward now about 15 years. And what we have now is, it's 2017, and Ardith and I find ourselves at the United Nations as civil society with ICAN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons.
We're going to show that on our screen
Right.
for the audience if they want further information, which I hope they will.
Well, ICAN is responsible, one of the key groups responsible. It's hundreds of countries all over the world are members of ICAN. And we needed a treaty that would take the loopholes that are in the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is 52 years old now. In fact, I was just at the UN for that conference review. And the NPT, when the time it started, had the 5 nuclear nations. Now we're up to 9. They were supposed to get rid of nuclear weapons, abolish them. Well, we're 52 years later, now we haven't. So ICAN said, we've got to have a new treaty that deals with some of the loopholes in that. And so on 7/7/17, that's an important date in history to remember, that is the day that 122 nations says yes to the treaty. And so then, of course, it had to be verified, and it became law. It became international law in January of 2019. But the important thing is you cannot possess, you cannot store, you cannot transfer, you cannot use nuclear weapons. And it really deals with the consequences, like the people from the Marshall Islands who suffer the effects of that.
I just lost a friend from on May 1st, a Navy veteran, Dan Donovan. I was at I sang at his funeral and arranged the honor guard. He was radiated in a Weetalk.
Oh, see, yes.
And these veterans are still fighting for their benefits.
Yes, they are. That's
he
what's
spent 12 years.
That's
the
what's
last
very
12 years.
yeah, that's
and it
what's
was
very sad.
classified for many years,
See?
and still the veterans and their spouses, remaining spouses, widows,
I know.
widowers are not getting benefits
Right.
they are entitled
Right,
to.
right. I mean, it's very tragic that, and we're the only ones who have ever used a nuclear weapon and dropped one, but it's very tragic that we still have not owned up to the responsibility, not only to the people where we dropped the bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki,
Yeah.
but to the people like your
The Marshall Islands and
the Marshall Islands
the
people.
communities that
Young
lost
people,
their
young
place
people
to
have
live.
really organized in the Marshall Islands, about that. ICAN won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017, and I want to tell your viewers and the 2 of you that you are winners of the Nobel Peace Prize, and you need to say that and to own it. And I say this seriously, Rachel, because so often we just think, oh, well, those people there did that. I mean, I can't do anything. Beatrice Finn, who's the director of ICAN, was very clear when ICAN was given the award, and there were hundreds of countries that are part of ICAN. We all, anyone who has ever worked to end the world of nuclear weapons, this medal, this Nobel Peace Prize belongs to you. And so
That's lovely.
you have won The Nobel Peace Prize, Rachel.
That is just
have-
astounding.
Pocky, you
Yes,
have won
yes,
the
yes.
Nobel Peace Prize.
And of course, one of the things that we know, and Pocky has reminded me and brought me to protest standing outside of General Dynamics, who just got a big contract for submarine warfare. I mean, it's just awful. And all of these are connected, and it's one to one to one to one together. And look what you started in Michigan, you and Sister Ardith. I mean, and it's organizing. And part of it is the education. When you said little towns outside of bases, military bases, and the people, because people are serving in the military does not mean that they are pro-war. There are a lot
In
of
fact,
people.
they're the ones that aren't, to be honest with
Yes,
you. Those little, no, you're right. We were in Oscoda at the time of the first Gulf War, and the military were always told to stay away from these nuns, all this sort of thing. There was like a little 7-Eleven across the street from the base and where we would witness. And during that Gulf War, every once in a while, one of the guys would call us over and they'd say, "We're not supposed to talk, but thank you for being here." We were with those young men when they went off to the war. In fact, the first morning, it was 8:15 in the morning, and I'll never forget it. We heard every B-52 take off, and they did not land until the sorties had dropped. We were there when those men came home and cried in our living room to share what their lives have been. No, people do not want war. It's the people who make the money on the war. It's the people who sit in their little castles.
Doing busy work, finding ways for war, profiteering, warmongering, weapons. It makes me nearly crazy when I think of Ukraine. There was so much that could have been done diplomatically. You're probably not aware, I got caught in the Arab-Israeli War in 1967. I was an Air Force officer's wife for almost 5 years and was secretary to the Chief of Information and Civil Affairs. It's quite a story. But yes, I mean, this is during Vietnam, and who would ever expect to be caught? But Wheelus Air Base in Tripoli, Libya was the training base for pilots from Germany for Vietnam. So,
well, and Rachel, I think what people don't understand, when we did our action out in Colorado and we were given a fine, which we would never give any money, so Jackie Ardith and I decided to go out there for 2 weeks, violated probation, went back to the scene and collected food, cans. We asked people to send in, we got food from all over the world, a can of food in lieu of restitution. Well, we got thousands of cans of food worth a lot more money than what we owed the government. But we wanted to give it, and we had it all arranged to deliver it to Peterson Air Force Base, where we were going to take the food. The Veterans for Peace helped us organize that. The morning we got there, it had all changed. Some higher up says, "We're not taking this food," blah, blah, blah. So we took it to the Denver Food Bank and the soup kitchen, and the man there was so grateful for the food, and he said, "Sisters," he said, "probably 65% of the people in here are veterans." But we had collected diapers and whatnot. And so on the TV, they were advertising so that families could come. People don't realize that military families, the poor, I mean, we don't care about our soldiers. They're on food stamps. They're not the ones making all kinds of money. So we did that so that people who so-called are in the military, in the wars, would be able to feed their families.
yeah. And there, you know, I was talking to a veteran I'll say last night, but by the time this airs, you know, who was talking about, we were talking about the way veterans are not being treated and not being cared for. I mean, this is a national disgrace.
Yes, it is.
And, you know, the poverty and housing problems for veterans, and they're so vulnerable.
And the
their families.
contamination. When we lived on that base, the officers were told, drink bottled water. Don't drink, you know. Well, these other folks, they couldn't afford bottled water.
That's the operative. The officers were told.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, that one of the things that's so exciting for me is when you're talking about finally exposing all the contaminants that are on these bases. Yeah. You know, it's really remarkable what's finally coming to light, and I'm so happy that we're shedding this light and this conversation about who really benefits from wars. You know, you mentioned just now General Dynamics just got a big contract.
I don't know, 32.9 or 29.3 for 5 years to make warfare equipment for submarines. And, you know, people who need jobs, you know, will think, well, this is great. This is Pittsfield. And,
Right.
you know,
Yes.
so there it is. And, you know, even Sprague Electric Company, all these war profiteering companies, that goes back in my family, but all these companies that are making, who's making all this money? And you're watching the income inequality grow and grow and grow.
And you look at the thing, I mean, one of the things that I really like to focus on is how in every congressional district there are these contractors.
Yes.
Every congressional district. And so, you know, there's this big question, what happens? So the president sends a budget to the Congress, and the war budget is always raised by the Congress because she wants more money for General Dynamics. He wants more money for Raytheon because they're in my district. And that's how you bring home, you don't bring home the bacon, you bring home the weapons, you bring home the munitions. You know, and it's so tragic. I just want to put in a plug for because recently I heard Elizabeth Warren, and she was challenged by one of the peace people about the amount of money that goes into weapons, and you know, she's on the Armed Services Committee.
And Richie Neal's head of appropriations. You know, what are they doing?
Well, she reminded us that what she's doing is a lot of good work. She challenges every general who appears before them, asking, would it be better to have more money go to the State Department than to the military? And every one of them says, yes, we need more money to go to the State Department because we need to practice diplomacy. Now, diplomacy won't help General Dynamics or Raytheon, but it will help the people. And so I think that's one of the cries, you know. We need to end this nuclear madness. And you know, and it's right now even madder than usual because of what's happening in Ukraine. And we don't need to go into all the specifics or you know, the different attitudes about it, but it's an example of how out of control war making is. And here it is, the 21st century, and people are still creating war as though it was the 12th. You know, I look at the bombed out buildings and I think, oh my God.
But a sign of hope, Pocky, is, I don't know if you've heard of Archbishop Wester, is the Archbishop, Roman Catholic Archbishop of Santa Fe, New Mexico, and he has just issued a pastoral letter because New Mexico has more nuclear weapons than any place. I mean, the beginning started in New Mexico, and he's written this pastoral letter calling on people of faith, on his churches, saying we must disarm, we must get rid of these weapons. So he's making that connection. And then I think the whole connection we have with climate.
I call it climate catastrophe,
That's
and I've
right.
done loads and loads of shows on this. I think nuclear proliferation and climate catastrophe are number one.
They go together.
They're absolutely
two sides of the
interconnected.
same coin.
Yes, and I'm very, very concerned, and I've said it on many shows about the children and the grandchildren to follow.
Right.
And I don't think we have elected officials that are really fighting to stop any of this. They're holding on to their jobs, and I'm generalizing here, but I truly believe that, and I'll go right from the local right up to the federal.
Right.
They need to get out of the way and really start getting connected to the people on the local level. And of course, part of what you just described was on the local level, organizing and educating people. We're not getting our multimedia conglomerates. That's why we do this show. That they're not educating the people about what they need to know for their daily lives.
Well, I don't think most people know that, you know, the United States has 800 bases all over the world. And that's why we're the greatest user, the U.S. military is the greatest user of fossil fuels.
Yeah.
And subsequently, one of the greatest polluters,
That's
the
right.
greatest contributors to the pollution,
pollution.
to this climate catastrophe, climate chaos.
Yeah.
That's true.
It's It's dangerously frightening.
Yes,
and it's, I fight for hope. And, right here is my little bit of hope is to just keep bringing it up. And part of it is this program. And
Well, we always say there's a difference between hope and optimism. I might not be very optimistic these days, but I'm hopeful. And nowhere does it say we have to be successful, we have to be faithful.
oh, thank you. I'm going to just stick that right in my mind in concrete. That's beautiful.
Right.
And as we're coming to the end of our program, let's have some final thoughts from both of you. Gosh, that's wonderful.
Final thoughts?
Well, I mean, I'm encouraged because I think people listening to this program listen to you and hear again and again, wherever you are, you can do something. And I think it's so important on so many different levels, so that wherever people are contributing, wherever people are waking up, that there's something you can do. And there's no hierarchy. I mean, it's admirable the time that you and Sister Ardith and others have spent in jail, in prison. But if someone just is willing to go out and to challenge the local politicians, to encourage them to look at what makes us really safe. It's not nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons do not make anyone safe. Housing, adequate food, health care. Those are the things that make us feel safe.
And a sense of community.
And a sense of community. Yes.
Has to be added.
So those are my final thoughts for the moment.
For the moment, which is never final. You'll be back on. We'll have to bring Sister Carol back up here. Again.
Well, I guess my final thoughts would be, I love to think of us all in a circle. And Paki mentioned many of the feelings I think that I believe about how we need to operate. But I like to feel that we are all called, everyone is called to be a universe disturber.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's like John Lewis saying that make good trouble.
That's right.
We make good trouble.
Right. And my closing thought would be to encourage anybody who's listening or watching to this program to take one step outside of your comfort zone.
Beautiful. And on that note, I will just say, as I say at the end of each program, if each one of us picked up one problem and solved it, imagine the incredible view we would all have of solutions rising. I am truly honored and grateful, Sister Carol Gilbert, and of course my friend and co-host today, Paki Whelan. Please come back again. And each one of you have a gift. Nobody has to tell you how to use your gift, and we can all be part of the solutions. Thank you so much.